Do you think most PMs are performing PM role these days?
I think a lot of PMs these days get told, you build it, go and make it happen, go and make it work. I don't think you're being a true product manager if you're not able to question whether that is the right thing in the first place. And if it's not, prioritize what you think is right over that. If all your insights are led because someone passed on a roadmap to you, then I would say you're not truly being and articulating what a product manager really is. If you're not questioning the solution, not questioning the designs, not questioning the implementation, not questioning even the go-to-market. I've worked with a lot of product managers before where they're sort of like, well, the release plan and the pricing and which markets we go to first, that's on the product marketing or the marketing team to figure out. And I'm like, no, it's not. You need to be heavily involved. If you've shipped it and you don't know how your users are using it, then ultimately I would say that really goes against the true essence of being a product manager, because your only role is to ship things of value. If you don't know the value that's being provided, then how can you say you did a good job?
Yasmin Desai, thank you so much for joining this episode. Can you a little bit tell about yourself and your journey into product management?
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, of course. So I joined, startups actually, even whilst I was at university. I worked part-time for a couple just because I quite liked the idea of working for a small company and being close to the leadership team, the founding team. And I knew that things were moving more towards the tech world. So that's why I sort of went straight into that as a field. Then when I graduated, basically went like full-time working for a couple of startups, and then had shifted into like operational roles, generally just where I found myself to be quite useful and where I can handle quite a lot of like multitasks at the same time. And then I had always dabbled a little bit in product, but never fully. And then I was in a company where luckily one of the CTOs came to me and sort of said, hey, you're kind of doing product anyway. Would you like to officialize it and make it a full-time thing? And I was actually really hesitant at the time. It wasn't something where when he told me, I was like, yeah, of course, let me jump on this. I really had to think about it. And consider whether it was the right move for me. So I spoke to a couple of the other product managers in the company. I was most scared about what that meant for my long-term track and progression. Because previously, if you would have asked me 7-8 years ago, I would have said, well, I'm going to keep going off the operational track and make it to COO one day. And so it was different for me to then maybe think that might not be the case anymore. But actually, when I had spoken to a couple of founders, people who are more experienced than me, they actually said it's easier to get into the COO track and a CPO track if you've done product. Most of the best COOs are actually product managers or had been in previous lives. So yeah, when he sort of offered that to me, I took it on. And actually, I remember a really distinct moment where I think maybe 2 weeks in, after I'd made the shift internally, and he was very kind. He was like, if this doesn't work for you, you can always go back to your old role, which was great. Not many places do that. So I was incredibly happy that fallback was there for me. But I remember having that chat with him 2 weeks after, and I was like, no, of course not. Why would I want to make that change? Like, it was just in that full 2 weeks, I had had such a good time and almost felt like I found my calling. That my past operational experience was just not as considered to me anymore.
And so when you transitioned from operation strategy to the product management role, what specific experiences or skills help you transition and build that product management skills?
I think for me, it was in operations, you have to have some sort of interconnection with every stakeholder and every department. So you get an insight into how all of them work. And in particular, I had been working quite closely with the sales team previously as well. So it's quite a unique insight that I could bring to the product team that I had. And I guess a couple of other things as well in terms of, things like CAC, LTV, efficiency ratios of where we're putting our marketing efforts had all come to me very easily because I've done it again in previous roles. So for me, working on the top of funnel, how do we convert customers, convert potential users, came really naturally because I had come from that background in operations of working on similar projects, at least. And, I remember one time I had to run a business case for investing in a new type of product, basically. And that to me was a relatively easy exercise because, again, working in like financial models, all stuff that I had done before. So relatively easy, but the harder part was obviously the technical part, right? So that was something that I didn't come to the table with. I hadn't had much experience with before, if any. But everything else that I had done in operations, from strategy, customer insights, just seeing processes of like how, busy and messed up our CRM was, and then what impact that was having for our sales team, what impact that was having for our customers, was stuff that was completely blind to the existing product teams. They didn't know that.
Getting into a product management role, there is so many ways, and there is not specific one clear path. So some people come from computer science background and some other different majors. Now, when you explain, for me, from your background in operations strategy, what I see is, so you didn't have a technical knowledge.
Yeah.
So when you became as a product manager, how did you fill that gap?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think most people will go to, I need to take, a JavaScript course, HTML, learn CSS, and do all these things and jump on it really quickly. And I did have those thoughts. I was like, should I be doing this as well? Is this the right thing for me to be doing? But actually, I felt that learning SQL, which I had done in a previous job anyway, so that came in really handy and meant that I could extrapolate and manipulate data really easily. Meant that a lot of the similar concepts applied when we were talking with developers. I had a great sort of lead developer, you could say, where we spent a lot of time, and he knew that I didn't come from a technical background, so we would spend at least an hour a week potentially talking about like a new concept. So he'd explain to me, why we would move away from a legacy system, and not even try to migrate and just build from scratch versus, trying to build on top of what we already had in our architecture. And so a lot of it was just learning on the job, to be honest. I never did anything deliberate, which was, I'm going to take this course, or I'm going to go out and learn this specific coding language, just because the amount of upskilling you have to do as a product manager when you haven't been one before is a lot anyway. And equally, you don't necessarily know which technologies you're going to be working with at any one point. So you can't cover all ground anyway. You really can't. Unless if you know that you're going to specialize in, let's say, apps or web apps, for example, fine. But there's no promise that you're always going to stick to that in the future. Let's say you lose your job, or let's say that, a product gets made decommissioned, then you don't necessarily know that you can stick with that anyway. And I definitely didn't have a preference in terms of whether I wanted to go app, web app, SaaS, anything like that. So I knew that it probably didn't make sense for me to just go all in and invest in one specific language, but rather just spend the time trying to understand concepts by just talking to the engineers and getting in the room when they're talking together. When we would do like feasibility sort of meetings of, okay, maybe we've pitched what the requirements are, and the engineers would sit there and sort of discuss some of the technicalities. Now I wouldn't be in the room there. I would sort of happily let them come up with the best solution and come back to me with a proposal. But in the beginning, I had to be in those conversations and not be afraid to be the one to ask all the questions that will come across as basic, and quite frankly are very basic as well, because it's the only way that you would learn and understand what they're talking about.
So in the beginning stage, you were involved in the details, you were asking questions, and then now it reached to a point where you don't ask about it and you let them do their work and then come back to you with a proposal. Why are you doing that, and why did you change this way of thinking?
I'm not going to sit here and suggest because I've learned everything and that I don't need to be in the room anymore. That's not the case. But where I've worked on, I've done front-end, back-end, APIs, web apps, mobile apps. And so I feel like I've got quite a broad perspective of most of the technologies that could apply. I've done stuff in machine learning. I've done stuff in a small amount in AI, very small. And so the reason that I would position of why I'm perhaps not always in the room when they're having those discussions now is because I feel quite confident in myself that if they were to put a proposal to me and say, hey, Yaz, we think we need to build it in this way and not that way, I would understand 60 to 80% of it. And then of the parts that I don't, I would just need to most likely async question them on them, and they would come back to me with a reasonable response that I could then, say, okay, yeah, I think we should do it this way, or, have we thought about this instead? Part of it is also just giving a bit more empowerment and autonomy to the engineers and their teams, just because, well, A, it can't be everywhere. B, I think that when you work with really smart engineers, and when you are with them, it's very evident. Again, I can trust fully that they will come back to me with maybe 80 to 90% the right solution. Maybe there's certain nuances to their response or to their solution that they might not have considered, and that's purely just because I might have more business context than them. But it's very rare that the business context that I have would 100% change the solution that they've come up with, and that's on me to give them the context upfront before they come up with that solution, rather than me saying, hey, we're going to build X and come back to me with the solution, and then afterwards I'll let you know the business context, which might likely change your solution. There's also an element of training and knowing as a product manager what parts are going to affect their solution and what parts won't, and knowing how much of that I need to give up front as well.
And this is very interesting because in my experience, what I came across was engineers are great at building what we need, but sometimes their solution is something that will, let's say we want to build a feature. We'll build that feature to the best quality possible, but not necessarily that feature would now work with the next feature, because they don't have the vision. So just staying in contact with them and seeing what's their solution will always help with the long-term vision. They're great builders, but they don't have the product vision. And as I said, they might over-engineer something with the best code base and the cleanest code out there and the fastest response, but maybe that's not close to what we need in the business objective. And I find that product managers who have good technical knowledge, that kind of builds trust to the entire team, especially with the dev team, that when you are suggesting ideas or questioning their ideas, it's just not something random. It's really that you put the time and effort understanding different technologies and concepts, as you talked.
Definitely. I think you really can't underestimate that, like being able to have a conversation with an engineer and then value you because you know exactly what it is that you're talking about. Can't say I definitely know the preference of what an engineer would prefer. Like, would they hold their hand up and be like, yeah, I'd prefer to work with a technical product manager than maybe one who's more commercial? I don't know. I'd like to think it would be different. Engineers would give different answers, to be honest. Let's say you're talking platform products, then yeah, you'd probably want them to be more technical. I don't think like a commercial product person would work there. And speaking from experience of trying to do platform products before. But I think it also depends on the longevity you had with your team as well. So, if I was to come into a new team, I probably wouldn't do hey, you come back to me with a solution and I'll review it. But when you've been working together, 1-2 years, and everyone is aligned on the solution and knows the product principles we've set, the engineering principles we've set, the scalability principles we've set, and the product vision and the business context and the context of the customer, I think if someone is empowered to have all of that and I can trust that they know all of that, wouldn't change my mind and say that I would need to be there in the nitty-gritty of the conversations. I found that technical product managers like to be in those conversations though, because you just lean towards what you know the most. And that's not a bad thing. It's really not. But I think that you just play to your strengths, really. I would find that a technical product manager probably leans away from things like strategy, whereas a commercial product manager would lean into that, and vice versa, right? And a technical product manager is going to lean into the technical side, whereas a commercial one is just going to lean a bit out of that. There is no real all-rounded, perfect product manager that knows everything, because ultimately there's about 10 to 15 different skills and qualities that you need to have, and you can't optimize and have them all at one time. And secondly, the expectation of what an all-rounded product manager is going to change from company to company and even product to product and team to team. So I really don't think that there's an onus on the product manager to have to try and do it all as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's just really different company to company, and also the previous structure of the company, the future goal of the company, how they want to structure, and how are the founders were when they built the company, and also what is the product. If it's extremely technical product, definitely you need to have a lot of technical understanding. But if it's not, maybe there are other people within the team which can help you with that technical depth. Also, in your experience, which was very great, was the team member were focusing on helping you to transition to this role, because a lot of time that's not the case, and that's make it harder when you want to get help, and maybe certain people within the team will not spend the time with you, or the culture of the company is not in a way that it will help you grow, but it's more like you just enter the company and you kind of had to brought the skills needed. We will not spend time teaching you the skill you need.
Yeah, and that's why I say I completely value the opportunity that I was given to make that internal move, because you have, I mean, I'd say when you join a company, you have that sort of like 3 to 6 month runway where you can afford to continually keep asking the questions. Then after a certain point, it becomes a bit weird if you're still asking them. And maybe some eyes will come your way of like, why don't they know that yet? So yeah, I do encourage people as much as possible to make that internal move, or if they are going somewhere new, to be, here's a really delicate balance. So because the number of product roles that are available for people that maybe haven't done the role before are so far and few. So there is an element of faking it until you make it. And so you don't, it's a really tricky ground to have that conversation of, I still need a bit of coaching in these areas. To help me, upskill, versus, I haven't come with a complete blank slate of no experience as well. If there was someone that was in that position where they had joined a new company and hadn't been a product manager before and they're expected to be a product manager, I think there's a lot to be done on their side of truly understanding what is the expectation of a product manager in that company. Because and for a lot of companies, it's not even a product manager that they're looking for. It's more of a project manager, or it's more just a product owner sometimes, which is, a whole debate in itself. So the sooner that you can figure that out as to what the company is actually looking for you to do, then you can put in place the sort of mitigations and provisions that you need to help you in that. Whether it's like buddying up with a developer that is on it is probably the best thing that you can do. Buddying up with another product manager in the company where you can sort of copy paste maybe some of the good stuff that they've done and templates that they've used and figured out how you do launches and all the rest of it. But I often find that being unique and bringing your own flavor of things that you would like to change is partly usually the reason why most people hire you. And so lean into that as well.
You have spoken about the challenges of breaking into product management. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about product management as a career?
A lot. I think firstly, people get attracted by the salary. Might be a bit blunt in me saying, but it is true. Like you see, depending on where you are, firstly, obviously, there's discrepancies in salaries between different geographies. But when you see, in San Fran, like a associate PM or even just a junior level, mid-level, in that sort of high 100,000s, it is attractive. Of course it is. The second being, it has become a job that is sort of, I would say, positively looked at socially. I would say 10 years ago, if you said you were a product manager, people would be like, oh, okay. Didn't really know what that was, or would ask you for clarification on what that means and what it does. Whereas now, I think if you say in a social circle that you're a product manager, you would get quite a considerable sort of silent applause maybe, but also probably also a couple of other people. And a number of times in a group where it's been, oh, I'm trying to break into product management, or I'm trying to be, or I am a product manager, or I know so-and-so who's a product manager. There are just so many more jobs available for it. I think the difference is that in the last sort of 5-10 years, companies have come to realize the added value that product managers bring. And that's why there's more jobs available for it. They realize that perhaps, and I don't necessarily like saying this, not that, if you left a team of developers and a designer potentially, and that they wouldn't be prioritizing the right things, they would just be prioritizing different things in a different way. I don't like it being said as they would be prioritizing the wrong things completely. Because then if it was so right and wrong, then it would be obvious to say what is right and just tell the team to do that instead. But the value that the product manager brings in terms of the customer insight and holding all different stakeholders accountable and getting all the insights to be able to come up with an informed decision isn't really a skill that anyone else could do that are within those cross-functional teams. There's many actors that can and want to do it and do an element of it in their job. I've seen great designers, I've seen great lead developers that think in that way. And so I think ultimately most people really find the job attractive just because of how much interaction you can get with all different areas of a company, of a business. And ultimately, if it works, you do get the limelight of it as well. When you have successes, generally, depending on the type of company that you work in though, but at least if we adopt the sort of American way of the product manager being the mini CEO, you get all the praise. It all does come down to you. And that can be so fulfilling and so satisfying as well. Obviously, you get the opposite, right? When it doesn't work and it's a fail. But I don't see that fails are considered as much of a low as it might be in sales, for example, right? In sales, we know there's highs and there's lows. You get your sale, you don't get the next one. You get your sale, you get another one. But I think that most companies consider fails just to be a learning. We learned that the customer didn't appreciate how we shipped this because it didn't have this interaction. Okay, cool. So you got one step closer to how you should have shipped it. So that's why I actually don't see it as like a win-loss. It's mostly a win and then just a half win in most circumstances.
I think definitely I would disagree with the salary part.
Okay.
You can, not to your point, but I think you can make high salary in other positions as well.
You can.
Engineers make really good salary, really close to PM, and so many companies even above PM, like easily. And a lot of European countries, they also make really good salary. And the thing is that when you're a product manager, you work on a fintech product. When you want to switch, go focus on a streaming product, they would say, "Oh, I don't think you're not a good match." But a PM who was focusing on a streaming product already is way stronger than you. And I think they give that PM stronger chance. But if you are a developer, there are differences, but not that much. So you can also transition much better within companies. So I definitely would say salary is, I don't say it's a myth, but I would say it's not so much the case. It depends on the company. Also, I would say that if you are going to be a product manager, get ready to be in meetings half of your week.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's something that people don't value. Like if you actually look at it and consider, and you're totally right, and engineers tend to get paid just as much, if not more, with a lower requirement potentially of like what's needed. So many engineers, might not have gone to uni, but just done those years of coding, which is way more valuable for them than it would be for any other role, pretty much. And so you can afford not to have that debt as well, which is great. And yeah, I think that's one thing that people sort of underestimate is like, yes, okay, cool. The salary is pretty okay. You can go high up in the ranks. Takes a lot though. Takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of meetings. And every PM that I know says, I'm in meetings sort of 9 to 5. And I only get my work done after 5 o'clock or before 9 a.m. That's mostly true, to be honest, because you need thinking time to sort of get into that focus zone. And a lot of the time, for me at least, it will come usually at night, and then I'm ready in the morning to like write it all down and put it on paper. But I have to do it, in that 1-2 hour slot before I know that anyone would have put in a meeting with me. I think it's a really tricky balance. It's really hard to get all your work done without the meetings. That's not to say it's impossible, though. I think sometimes and I've definitely been here before, on having a meeting for something that definitely could have been solved in maybe a thread on a Slack over 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or a quick, hey, could you just stand by at the end of stand up for another 3 minutes, rather than thinking it needs to be done sort of on demand there and then. Roll it into the next meeting if you can, if you know that the developer or whoever it is that you need is going to be there. You can send it that way. I'm a massive fan of recording things and then sending it to people, letting them digest it, and then they'll come back to me with their thoughts. And so I use Loom a lot for that. And that has cut down my meeting time a lot.
Absolutely. I worked at companies where more meetings meant you're busier, so you're more productive and you're more valuable. And I find it absolutely the quite opposite. I find it very draining to go and have 2-3 hours of meeting per day. And this compounds over time, unnecessary conversations, and also lack of attitude of making the right decision faster. And also, I think, even though as a product people, we are kind of used to, and we know that it's going to be a lot of meetings, but also engineers really don't like it. When you pull engineers into meetings multiple times per week, they definitely don't like it. I have a lot of engineering friends and they just like, look, tell me what you need. Tell me the acceptance criteria. Explain to me a bit of the business goals, and then let me focus on it for a week. If I have a question, I will come back to you. You don't need to constantly schedule a meeting to check up on me. And that's what I would say. It's something that I believe it's also the company's culture, that some companies just tend to have more meetings, and also your managers have more meetings and they want more meetings, and it just gets compounded from all the verticals, which you need to talk to the marketing, legal, other stakeholders, and then the customer discovery calls, and then engineers. Most of your week you're just in the calls. That's it. You're just coordinating.
Yeah.
You're basically like a project manager rather than a product manager.
Yeah, and I think that's a very dangerous line to get into, right? Like, and not to say that there's anything wrong with a project manager role, but it's very easy to just become a facilitator, as you said, and just sort of negotiate a few discussions and then ultimately make a decision. And that's not really the true beauty of what a product manager is. There's a lot of busy work that is involved in being a product manager. And I think it is, if you think about it and really take the time to assess maybe what's in your calendar and what could be removed, what you could easily say, I'm not attending this until I know that there's a pre-read or I know what you want out of me, and vice versa, because there's other people in the room as well. I had it just last week actually of, I kind of put out like a draft proposal for a new product feature that we're working on, and instantly it was like, hey, can I chat to you about this? Hey, can we have a quick call on this? And I kind of really enforced like, no, I know that I've written it really clearly and concisely, so I know that your questions will actually be informed as well. So granted that you have them, for sure, I'm not saying that, but I ended up just saying, firstly, put your questions as comments in the document, because if you have them, I'm sure someone else has them. I'll respond to it there. If you don't think that I've responded to it well enough, then I'm happy to take a 15-minute call. But please give me all your questions and stuff up front. And I found that works a lot easier than maybe sometimes in my previous, when I was a bit more junior, it was every new thing of discovery was a kickoff call, without maybe necessarily even knowing what we're going to be discussing on the kickoff, other than I know that I need to kick this off. And so like knowing that you don't have to do kickoff calls and you can go straight into, hey, this is the customer insights, this is why I've positioned and have evidence that we need to build this. Here's how far I've gotten with a draft proposal potentially. You can come in and say, hey, here's my thoughts on the proposal. And you can go even higher level and be like, hey, I don't think we should be building this whatsoever. What about the other thing we learned last week and why we're not prioritizing that? And that removes a lot of the sort of face time that you need with the team. Granted, you can only really do that when you've sort of built trust and worked with them a bit and know that you've got a fair few leads in your team as well. Like if you've got a team of more junior people, it is harder to do that. It is. Because they tend to have more questions, they tend to not have as much context, they tend to not know all the intricacies potentially and nuances of the product. But that's where I think just as a PM, you can go further a lot faster by just sort of maybe taking some shortcuts. And I think really as our role as a product manager, it is always to qualify and check whether we're doing something that is considered optimal as well. If our whole job is to optimize for our customers, why do we not do it for ourselves? So I find that if you're not able to do that in your own life, I mean, I could go on and on about how many product frameworks I take into my own management of my own life. And I actually think it's a really easy thing to do. So we should be doing that to ourselves as well.
Do you think most PMs are performing PM role these days?
A little bit of a loaded question. I think, well, firstly, I think it depends on where you're looking at. But if I talk about what I know, which is the UK, and the UK sort of tech scene, I would go so far as to say no, they're not performing PM roles. To me, there's a few definitive factors of what classifies a PM. And the first one, and this is a huge one, is the discovery piece. So figuring out what it is that you should build without being told what it is. And I think that that's a very fine line. And I would go so far as to say is if you're lucky enough to work in a company where you aren't getting told, or at least you might be getting told, but as in you still have the autonomy to turn it down and be like, no, I don't think this is right. I think a lot of PMs these days get told, you build X, go and make it happen, go and make it work. And in a way, I can see how that might be a luxury for a lot of people because they don't have to come up with the ideation. They don't have to come up with, hey, is this the right thing to be building? It is a very easy sell to be like, I'm building this because the CEO said it, or, whoever the COO said that we need to make ourselves defensible and hence we need to have a new vertical or whatever it is, right? I don't think you're being a true product manager if you're not able to perhaps question whether that is the right thing in the first place. And if it's not, prioritize what you think is right over that. But if all your insights are led because someone passed on a roadmap to you, or all your roadmap items are sort of being drip fed in some way or the other from someone, then I would say you're not truly being and articulating what a product manager really is. And I think the other side to that is if you're, again, not really questioning the solution, not questioning the designs, not questioning, the implementation, not questioning even the go-to-market. I've worked with a lot of product managers before where they're sort of like, well, the release plan and the pricing and the, which markets we go to first, that's on the product marketing or the marketing team to figure out. And I'm like, no, it's not. You need to be heavily involved and it instinctively when you are in that place, because as a PM, let's say you've come up with the most amazing product, its implementation, you feel so strongly because you know your customers so well. And let's just say that the pricing is just off. It is, you've gone with maybe, let's just say, a monthly subscription model where you actually pitched and that it should be like pay-as-you-go credits. This is just for argument's sake. If leadership comes in and says, no, we're going to do it as a subscription model, and you don't raise your voice, again, you're not being a true product manager to me. And you'll know when you're in that position because you just have so much conviction that you are aware of what your customers are like and how they would appreciate things, and what level of transparency your customers need and what pricing would work for them, that you would raise your hand. It's not to say you're ultimately responsible for pricing, because obviously pricing is a massive thing and requires lots of inputs. But that's just an example where, I sort of see that product managers who are effectively working as product managers will maybe even come up with the discovery themselves, but then when it comes to the execution is very sort of piecemeal driven as to, I'll do this bit and this bit and this bit, and I can tick it off and say it's all done. And I don't need to care about when it's shipped and worry about the success metrics after. If you've shipped it and you don't know how your users are using it, then ultimately I would say that really goes against the true essence of being a product manager, because your only role is to ship things of value. So if you don't know the value that's being provided, then how can you say you did a good job? And I think that was the easiest and quickest sort of win for me when I did make that role transition into product management. I sort of looked at things and I was like, okay, well, how much value did I bring to our users versus the other product managers? And fair enough, they were on a higher salary than me just because they had more experience than me. But it was a very easy conversation when I came to the table and I said, I brought X amount of revenue, additional revenue from the customer, because this is the amount of value that I gave. I don't think the other product managers can say that they did the same. Firstly, because they didn't even track it. And secondly, because they didn't track it, they can't quantify it. And so I would say really don't underestimate how much you need to know what value you did or maybe didn't bring. Not everything brings value to the user, and that's fine. But again, it's all about learning what you shipped and iterating on that as well.
It's very interesting that when I asked you the question, I was just curious what's going to be your answer. But now that I heard your answer, and I'm thinking back in companies I worked, product managers that I know, I think you're actually one of the first people that is speaking about it, that I'm aware, that you're saying that, yes, a lot of product managers are being told what to do and they focus their best on building what it's told rather than them going out there and discovering what should be built, how it should be built, and what metrics to follow to see if what we build would actually work.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say I'm the only one. I do know that Marty Kingham put out a quite a controversial piece. Well, he's done quite a few, right? But quite a controversial piece a while back on exactly this. And I would recommend that people read his article on it as well. It's basically just around the difference of being a product owner versus being a product manager. And he really urged people who were product owners to try and make that move into being product managers, because he sort of made a prediction that he thinks that those roles of product owners won't be around in the next 5 to 10 years. And that actually there'll be a new wave of companies realizing, hang on a minute, there's are companies really valuing product owners? Are they realizing how much value that they bring, and potentially that a product manager just does everything that they do and then some instead? And so I think that I mean, I've already seen companies adopt that. And I mean, I'll be honest, quite encourage it as well. I don't necessarily like the distinction between product owner and product manager. I think product manager is just more of an encompassing role of everything that a product owner would do and more.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you see a difference between the skill needed in the early stage startups versus more mature scale-up companies?
Yeah, I mean, well, when you're in an early stage startup, it is literally all about speed. So it depends how early you're talking, right? I've done everything from, we're just an idea and we need to get product market fit, through to, okay, well, we've got product market fit, but we either need to, grow 3x month on month, or expand into different geographies or verticals. But even in both of those sides, it's all about speed. Everything is about how quickly you can ship things out, test things, learn things. Because the one figure that you're probably trying to put some value against is either not necessarily always revenue, but it will be some form of like number of customers, number of active customers, total revenue per customer might be one that you're looking at as well. So for you as a PM in that sort of role, I wouldn't say it's easier. It's not, but it's easier in the sense that generally a vision is there, generally a strategy is there, generally there's a pricing approach that you could try. Generally there's, if you're lucky enough to have competitors, or I'm lucky enough to have competitors, you can sort of copy and validate, or just try different things than what your competitors are doing as well. And then you'll reach like different stages of the product very, very quickly though. So a lot is actually just about adaptability. You'll go from maybe only being the first PM to then maybe having three, and then sort of dividing up the journey potentially, if that's how you divide it, between the three of you. And there's a lot to keep up with in terms of, you'll realize one day, oh, well, we don't have the data stored correctly, so I can't pull this information. And then you'll get the team to go back and put in the data infrastructure so that you can be tracking these things properly. And you'll reach sort of new stages of what I call like break and restart again and again, and very quickly. And so if you're into the speed and the excitement and, putting something out on a Monday and, sort of seeing the results by Wednesday and already making the decision by Friday of what you do the next week, then I would really consider that that's for you. I think, again, then the more sort of slightly more corporate, the bigger the size of the company you go, it's much more about potentially optimization of a product, working with a lot bigger teams. So there's a lot more governance. Typically, in that smaller stage, you probably wouldn't even have a legal person. Like, more often than not, I just had to email our lawyers and be like, because we don't have someone in-house, you're sort of like our dedicated go-to. I would just position the problem that we're looking at, and they would come back to me really quickly. I find that even though, the bigger you go, and then you'll have legal in-house counsel or whatever it might be, and I definitely appreciate having them there. Just a lot more considerations, a lot more angles that you would look at it from, a bit more slowing down. Depending on the type of company, I've spoken to people where they have a release process where you're only releasing every 3 months. And so the amount of documentation that you're working on to put something out is a lot. It's a lot more than you'd ever experience when you're in that startup. And I'd go so far as to even argue, when you're in that early stage of the startup, you probably haven't documented anything. There's no decision documentation. There's no proposal documentation. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't on that one. You've probably lost the designs, or they live in someone's Slack channel, rather than it being like a nice articulate process of, all the design systems live in Figma and all the designs live there. And then we move them to a Jira ticket and go through that nice cycle of release, and then it's out. And so that's stuff that you'll find that changes a lot more. And I think just the amount of dependencies is a lot. So talking to the other product owners, managers, whoever it is that you're working with, engineers, other departments, and knowing what your potential change might impact will be a lot more likely in a bigger company than it would be when you're in that startup phase. And not everyone can hack the startup phase, might I add. It's not easy. It's also, I would say, harder if you've come from corporate and trying to make it into startup than potentially if you haven't done anything before. There's quite a common saying of, it's easier to teach someone something than it is to make them unlearn and relearn a different way. And I think that does really apply in startups. That's not to say all the time. I've definitely seen people who have come from corporate and made it work. But they came in knowing that the previous ways and approaches that they've done won't apply. And so I think it's a mixed bag of the type of personality, the type of energy, the type of compromises that you'll have to make when you do enter into a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we get closer to my next question. I think it's kind of related to what you just said at the end. So you recently gave a talk on unconventional ways to land your first product role. What are some of those unconventional strategies you think really makes a candidate stand out?
Yeah, so the reason I gave that talk, again, that was sort of in the midst, and we're still in it, where there's more product manager roles. Sorry, there's more product people that want to be more product managers than there are roles. And I think that even though, we've kind of gone through the wave of COVID, and yes, more companies are still around. Some obviously didn't survive. There's still a massive discrepancy between the amount of jobs that are available and the ones where they're accepting people. And I think even the ones that I have seen that are accepting people have a very high bar as well, really, really high bar. And so it's not just anyone that they're willing to take. Whereas, sort of, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, you'd accept a candidate if they met 70, 60% of the criteria and be like, yeah, okay, cool, the 30 we can with go or upskill or whatever it is. And now I really find that bar is like 90-95%. They have to be ticking the box for that role. By the way, I don't think this goes for just product management in terms of what I'm about to say. But I think people forget sometimes that when you're looking for a job, the standard way of applying, i.e. uploading your CV and your cover letter, literally give you like 5% chance, probably not even, of getting all the way through and landing that job. And then I think that some people, obviously they acknowledge that and they're like, yeah, okay, cool, that's not my strategy. And then the next best strategy that people talk about is networking. And so they'll say, okay, cool, I'm going to go to 2 to 3 different events per week or per month or whatever it is, and, reach out to people on LinkedIn, ask them for a coffee chat, and that's going to be my route to success. And granted, it's not the wrong way. There is no wrong way in any of this, to be fair. Slightly more probable that you might get further and might get a higher chance of being selected, I guess is the word. But then there's a part here which is like, okay, if you look at designers will have a portfolio. If you look at engineers, they usually have their GitHub or whatever, they'll have a code base, right? But they'll make public and people can see it. But what do product managers have? Well, actually, we all have portfolios. We all have features that we've released with success metrics and customer insights and all the rest of it, and a process that we took that was hopefully logical and shows how we got there. But we don't do anything with it. I don't think I've seen any product manager that publicly shows their portfolio, and I am one of them as well. I have one, but I have just haven't made it public. So I'll share it, potentially in interviews and stuff. But if I was to be job searching again, it's probably the one thing that I would do is make a portfolio. Let's say I had a selection of 3 companies that I really, really, really wanted to work for. My suggestion in that talk, and I will still stand by it, is let's just say it was Monzo, and you're applying to be on the team that is working on the mortgages side for day-to-day customers. Why are you not taking screenshots of their flow and saying, these are the potential product features that I would improve. This is why I need to validate. Obviously, considering that I don't have like 90% of the context, this is what I would do on the first day that I would come in, and to qualify that this would be the right thing. And here's my approach, and maybe here's a couple of wireframes. And you can record yourself. Like I said with Loom, like go and do a presentation and record yourself and say what the end goal is and what you'd be validating it against and the success metric that you'd be looking to move. That's going to take you leap years ahead than everyone else that is just applying direct, or even applying because they know someone internally in the company. I found that doesn't even get you that far anymore as well, just because, at least in the UK, it is even though the tech scene is quite big, everyone knows everyone, or at least someone knows someone who's worked with someone. And so although the networking aspect is relatively easy, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you everything, because I can guarantee, when I've been in roles before where I have been hiring, the number of people who message me a week on LinkedIn asking, hey, I'm interested in that job, can you have a coffee? And then I ended up having to put a strict rule of, I can't have a coffee with everyone. And that means I can't have it with even one person, because it would be unfair. I'm biasing my interview process if they come out and reach out to me. And similarly, even if they try to reach out to any of the engineers, then fine, it's really up to the engineer if they decide to. But the likelihood that that's going to come back to me is so low. So low. It would have to be a lot for an engineer to be impressed and realize that this is because they're actually trying to get an in, and then go to Yaz and be like, hey, I spoke to this great candidate, and within 15 minutes, I realized that they were great. It's not going to happen. And so that's why I suggest put a portfolio together, put a product feature improvement that you think that the company could benefit from, or the exact company and the exact role and the exact product that you're actually applying for. And that's going to, hopefully if you get that in front of the eyes of the right person, it makes it so much easier. Because if you think about it from the other person's perspective, the hiring person, and usually remember as well, it doesn't usually get to the hiring manager until like the 3rd stage anyway. You might, as a hiring manager, do a bit of sifting through all the applications at first, but usually these days it's the HR team that will do it. So you need to know that it's the HR person that you need to get their eyes on it first. And, will it stand out to a HR person? Yeah, 100%. Because if they can understand it, like if the everyday person can understand it who's maybe not in product, then they're going to raise that and flag that to the hiring manager and be like, hang on, I've seen something that's pretty incredible here. I don't know if it's along the right lines, but do you want to give this a quick sense check? And I think it's just about, and to be fair, I've always been about uniqueness. You have to do things that are just going against the grain sometimes. When you know that the likelihood of something is so low, you have to do something different. You have to. We're not, 15, 20 years ago, where when you came out of uni, you had a lot of confidence that you would just get and land the job, because they just don't exist anymore.
When you're hiring, what mistakes do you see candidates make most often when they're applying for product roles, especially those without a traditional product background?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I usually find that maybe 50% of those will make it so far as the second stage, first stage, and then that's about it. Some will go as far as doing the technical case study or whatever case study that we put together. I think that most of them know how to talk theoretically about a framework. So that, they can say, oh, well, I'd do ideation, and then we'd come up with the prioritized one by doing a nice scoring framework. And that's the one that we'd go ahead with. And they can take the logical steps of how you might progress from an idea through to a shipped product, but you can sort of very easily see, okay, well, if you position, okay, tell me a reason why you wouldn't use the ICE framework. Most PMs who haven't been a PM before wouldn't know how to answer that. They don't know the practical applications of when you wouldn't use an ICE framework. Similarly, the other things that I find is just, what are you validating? What's your riskiest assumption? And also acknowledging that you don't know anything about the context of the product. And so how would you go about finding that out without assuming things? So the worst cases are when they've made 15 different assumptions without calling them assumptions, firstly. And they've just said, this is my solution and this is what I would build, versus someone who acknowledges that there's a lot of assumptions that they would have to make, knows who they would have to go and speak to qualify or invalidate their assumptions, and can sort of spin off well, technically there's 4 different angles that I could take here. Generally, this is where I might get stuck. This is what I would have to do to unblock me and take things forward. So I think it's mostly around the process. When they talk about the process that they would take, so I specifically do a case study that's usually around here's a product, here's maybe what's working, what's not working, and what would you do to improve it. And generally I find that if there's anyone else in the room, and this is where deliberately I'll bring in a designer and a developer, if they come back to me saying, I couldn't follow what it was that they were saying, then I just know that it's not going to be a fit, and they probably haven't worked enough on products. I appreciate I'm not helping solve the issue there, which is that there's a lot of product managers that will come in not having done product management before. And it's hard because you can't necessarily always refine the skill without being in a company as well. You can only do so many product sort of ideations and product processes by yourself. Maybe you could do 1 or 2 at a hackathon or something like that. And so it is hard. I can see how it would be really hard to really ace that technical case study or normal case study if you haven't worked in a product position before. So it is a bit catch-22, it really is. But I would encourage people, if you have maybe a small cohort of other people who are being PMs, you can take it in turns to be okay, cool, we're going to take this idea as if we were going to, build an MVP, and you all on different days play different actors. So one of you is a designer, one of you is a developer, one of you is a PM, one of you is, let's just say, a salesperson. And you take it in different days of you being different actors. Then at least you get to see the different perspectives and come up with something at the end. And then that way you would learn, okay, actually, if this was my day job, this is how I'd be doing it. This is what I'd be suggesting. It does require a lot of effort though, right? You have to then go out and find other people who are wanting to be PMs. But actually, I would say that there's so many. They're all sort of hanging around in the same places as well in terms of online communities, online groups. That it would be, well, I would hope that it would be relatively easy to find. So this is a difficult one because there's no one thing that I can say you should do X to make sure that you pass the interview stages. I can only say that as a hiring manager, it is very evident when someone hasn't been a product manager before.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I learned from transitioning from an engineer to a product manager was take each interview or opportunity extremely seriously and use it, and you should put it 100%. So even if you would not get this role, you're a bit better for the next interview because you don't know exactly which company you're going to be managing their products. And these are, and even to this day, the way to get into a product role is also so different company to company. The assignment which is given to you is also extremely different because of the challenges those companies are facing. So you can definitely spend a lot of time focusing on that. Also, you can try to reach out to some other product managers, see their perspective, and see how would they try to solve that.
Exactly. And actually, you reminded me that when you do apply for something, always apply for 2 to 3 other things that you know that you actually don't want, because that's where you learn the most, right? So I'll always do 2 to 3 case studies of companies that I know that I'm not going to take, even if they give me the offer, because I'm at least practiced and seen different perspectives. So I mean, there's stuff that I've learned that I would never have known, and this is being a seasoned product person, getting feedback. I think the last one I got was you just didn't show enough sort of like front end design perspective, and I was like, oh well, kind of just thought that it was okay to go in with maybe a back end heavy case study. And so I made sure that in the next one I was showing something that was both front end, back end, application system as well. But I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have been able to get there if I hadn't got that feedback from the other company. And the other point that you said of, people will lend their time usually. And so if you say, hey, I've got an interview with this company, I could see that you used to work there or that you work in a similar sort of industry. Could I run my presentation through with you as if you were the interviewer? That you're going to get so much confidence from doing that. And in fact, I actually do that with some of my coachees. People come to me and they'll be like, I've got this case study next week. Can I practice 2 versions on you? And that gives them so much more confidence and a different perspective so that they're ready when they do go in for that case study.
We're slowly getting to the end of this episode. Is there something you would like to share which you're working on, or books or courses that you think it will be good for the listeners to check them out?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I don't really prefer the sort of really strict product specific framework books. So, I've read sort of Inspired, Loved, Empowered, all of those, and I do think that they're pretty good. I actually much prefer books where you can sort of infer and learn about the product through how they've talked about their company's success and failures. So, for example, Shoe Dog is absolutely one of them. I think there's one of Zappos and customer happiness. And even though it's about customer happiness, there are so many key principles that are really interesting for product managers in there, as to how do you keep your customers happy, why those things psychologically keeps them happy as well. And so I quite like books that aren't like 100% directly related to product, but still give you enough that you can think about it. Google had one as well. That was great. That was, talking about some of the sort of successes and fails. Obviously, Google have closed down a hell of a lot of things that they've spun up as well. So those are the books that I like to read like in my spare time. And there's no real, logic that I apply to the ones. If there's a company that I think is interesting, that has done pretty well, significantly well, then, I want to learn about how someone on the inside perceived and considered their success, and give me some of these sort of insider tips as to how and why it worked or how and why it didn't work as well. Courses, I think, is a really interesting one. Like, as we've said, there's no real route into product. And a lot of people will ask me, well, should I take a product management course? I think really it depends is the answer. It depends on what you've done before, how much insight you've had into product. If you're an absolute career changer, so for example, you've never been in tech, you've never worked on any sort of tech product or even physical product, then yeah, I think those courses are really helpful for you. So, I've had a couple of nurses that I've coached before, and I'm like, you need a course. It is highly recommended that you do go on that course. Essentially, then try and read with the health tech, get anyone in health tech, and then make another transition when you are into being a PM. There's a couple of steps that people don't usually realize that they have to take when they're so far removed from product management. But I would say, like, if you're in tech, it could be argued both ways if you should or shouldn't take a course. It really just depends on your particular case, how much time you can dedicate, whether it's, again, like a sort of active shift that you're doing versus one that maybe is a bit more passive, or you're just trying to do an internal move. There's just so many factors that are taken into consideration with courses. I don't think it's not easy to just sort of flat out say, yes, do a course or don't do a course. A lot also depends, if you've got the money or if your company is willing to pay towards that, maybe from your professional development budget as well. But what I would say is, on the positive side, if when you are in product management, it's actually quite easy, relatively, to shift away again if you really wanted to. And I don't think people talk about that enough. So sometimes I've seen it happen. I wouldn't say it's a trend, definitely not a trend. But where people are like, actually, I've done 10 years of being a PM. I don't like how it's fills my whole life with so many meetings, and I want something that's maybe a bit more on the IC level, even though PMs can be ICs as well, individual contributors, rather than the managerial track. But sometimes, I've definitely had conversations with people where they're like, just want something that's maybe a bit more I can do on my own hours, help with family life as well, be a bit more flexible, not necessarily having to be pulled into meetings and slowing the team down if I'm not responding quickly as well. So I do think it's a very fulfilling, a very satisfying role. There is so much content out there, so much. You would struggle to know which one to go to that gives you the right information, because ultimately there's no such thing as the right information when the product management role is not the same in every company. And so I would say don't get bogged down in thinking I have to do all these courses and I have to watch all these TikToks and follow, every single seasoned PM and see how they've done it. And, I've definitely gone through that period of being like, I'm going to listen to every Lenny's podcast and every Product Rebel podcast that I can hear of and know. Because ultimately, although you can learn from them, it's actually quite hard to then apply it into your day job as well. Because again, you're not seeing the context, you're not actually seeing the physical output of their work. And when people talk about their work, obviously they overemphasize it as well, of how well it went, how easy it was. They don't talk into the nuances, the difficulties that they might have had when they were doing that. So just really think about what is right for you, that doesn't take too much time, that, still allows you to conserve the right amount of energy if you are trying to make that transition.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining this episode. And it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much for having me.